All right, so here's a summary of the major changes. And we can kind of just touch on some of these. We've talked about most of them already. All right, so MDO is now our concept. We talk about operations during 3 different contexts. We've got an OE model that talks about the 5 physical domains and their 3 dimensions. We've got new tenets. We've reintroduced imperatives. We've re-looked and re-explained how we can talk about combat power in terms of what we apply against the threat and what the role of warfighting functions are in terms of generating that combat power. We've talked about the operational framework in terms of the different areas and the operations we want to conduct in those areas, this idea of main and supporting efforts. The theater strategic level war, we did not talk about that during this, but the senior Army echelon is a theater army. And theater armies have to resolve what? The employment of land power to meet theater objectives in the context of a larger global strategic objectives, right? That's what our COCOM commanders do, and the Army is a theater, senior Army echelon in any particular theater, has a role in that. We've talked about the maritime environments and contested deployments for the first time as well. We've got a 9th form of contact, right? So we've had 8 forms of contact for a very long time. Some of them we had to modify a little bit to keep up with joint doctrine. Electronic contact is now electromagnetic contact, for example. But we brought influence in, right? And influence in this hyper-connected world. We have the ability to influence individual soldiers even and leaders in adversaries or enemy formations, and they have the capability of doing the same to us. So this is bigger than the barracks lawyer, right, that's causing a disruption in a company. You've got people that can reach out overseas and bring thousands of barracks lawyers to bear on our formations and our troops, so we need to be aware of that. And then lastly, information. And we didn't talk information a whole lot. We're going to publish a book on information here in the spring. But we've changed the mission variables to include information as a component for each of the MET-TC variables, right? Because information considerations are, and that brings us back into aligning those variables with human information and physical advantages, those 3 dimensions of the OE. All right, so we got a lot of different ways for people to access our doctrine or to hear people talking about our doctrine. And I'm not going to go through each of those. So you got a link to where you can download 3 of. That link also can allow you to navigate around the Army Publications Directorate website where you can access all Army and Joint Doctrine that's not classified. We've got our own website. We are creating audiobooks for all of our ADPs and FMs and some of our select ATPs, and we take requests from the field in that regard. We've got podcasts and videos that talk and discuss different doctrinal ideas. Their focus is really for our non-commissioned officers and company grade officers, but people will find utility, all people will, in terms of the Doctrine Digest videos. Those podcasts get into the reason why, right? We bring subject matter experts in so that you can hear why did we write a book a certain way? What were the lessons learned? What was the purpose of what we were trying to do? And we have honest discussions with the subject matter experts, including senior leaders, to talk about that. So people find those pretty useful. We got some social media outreach. And then the writing team, right? We didn't write this all by ourselves. We had a writing team that leveraged the capabilities across TRADOC and the operational forces we were going. But we've got a core team of about 5 officers and retired officers here that wrote this book. And they're always interested, just like I am, in your feedback as you read this, right? Because we will, at some point, publish a change 1. And we want to make sure that we got feedback from the field. If you see something that we didn't address in some level of detail or you found a mistake, then let us know, because we're always interested in starting that professional dialogue across the force. Okay, so we're going to open it up now for some questions. Anybody has any questions here? Yes, sir. Yeah, we didn't mention it here in the briefing. You're absolutely correct. We do mention operations in urban terrain in the book as one of the factors that you take in, particularly with MET-TCI, right? We published a book on urban operations, ATP 306, last summer. We think it's the best one that the Army's had since we've been doing that, and we would encourage people to read that because we talk about it more than just fighting block to block inside of a city. We talk about the larger considerations in terms of planning and what urban operations, how they fall out in the scope of an overall campaign. Good question. Synchronization and integration are two significant components of convergence. So when we talk about convergence in the book, we break down its different components. The first is the integrating of Army and joint capabilities at the right echelon, right? So that's a judgment call by commanders. We do that through task organization, we do that from authorities. And then synchronization is the application of those capabilities over time and space to achieve convergence. So we address both integration and synchronization, right? And we do that in terms of the discussion we have on achieving convergence as an outcome. Yeah, so let me address the mass piece first, right? Because one of the things when convergence was still part of the concept, there's actually a slide that had a bullseye, and it said convergence, and it had all these things going into the single bullseye. But when you read what it was addressing, that's not really what they were talking about. So when we talk about the combinations of decisive points in different domains, right, we could talk about server stacks, command posts, firing batteries, communications nodes, other sensors that are out there, and I'm describing like an integrated fires command or an integrated air defense system, for example. But that would be true when you're talking about an enemy formation too, right? It's still composed of these different nodes and capabilities, each of which could be considered a decisive point in terms of what the enemy's trying to achieve or what we're trying to achieve vis-a-vis the threat. And so what's different than mass is we're not looking at one point, we're looking at multiple points. And then when you have effects against those points, you may have those effects via maneuver, you may have them through fires, joint fires, Army fires, aerial delivered surface to surface, maritime surface to surface, right? Maritime air to ground. All of these things, we're talking about layering them in time and space. And you heard the units, they talk about the windows, right? Because you don't have the capability to do that continuously across the breadth and depth. You're doing it in specific times and places by the simultaneous and sequential employment of Army and joint capabilities. And then you get that downstream effect that accrues on a decision maker, right, or an enemy formation, or a geographical area. Say you're doing a wet gap crossing and you want to prevent the enemy from affecting that. So I've got to do the analysis to think about all the things that can affect us as we're crossing that river, for example. And then I want to employ capabilities in such a way to keep them from doing that. So it's very different than mass. Mass may have a piece of that in terms of I need to destroy something, so I have to mass fires on that one location. But it's bigger than just that one decisive point, it's multiple decisive points. In 2017, we used the word convergence because we didn't like the definition as it was. We used the plain English use of the word in there. And when we revise all the rest of our doctrine based on 3.0, we're going to have to change that in multiple publications to use convergence as we describe in FM 3.0. Did I answer that?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, I think the first thing in terms of affecting lower tactical echelons, companies, platoons, is to have a firm idea and understanding of that operational environment model in terms of what's out there that can hurt me and what my hire, maybe me if I'm assigned something, right? I have a forward air controller perhaps, right? Or a TAC-P or somebody that can employ capabilities to support my company or platoon. But it's really about seeing ourselves and seeing the threat in the OE and then understanding what my hire is doing to enable freedom of action for us. And I want to understand that 2 levels up, just like you want your squad leaders to understand what your intent is as a company commander, right? The other thing is I would say that particularly from a large-scale combat operations perspective, is from the very beginning, from the time we're commissioned or we become non-commissioned officers, is to always look at how I can employ combined arms with what's available to me and then my next hire headquarters. And everything we do should be seeking to create dilemmas because I'm employing combined arms to the maximum possible extent. And that'll look different in an MP company than it would be in a tank company team or a striker company, for example. but the dynamic is still the same. Was that clear enough? Okay. So what we say in FM30 is it's the principal tactical formation during large-scale combat operations. And we say that because division is the first echelon that has access to those multi-domain capabilities and allocates them down to the lower tactical echelons and then employs them to enable success in close combat, in the close fight. That doesn't mean they're necessarily the most important formation in any given time and space, right? Because if we say corps are the headquarters that achieve convergence to enable division freedom of action, right? Then corps are important too, just like BCTs are important for the divisions to be able to achieve their objectives. But it's the principal tactical formation because it's that sweet spot that reconciles close operations with deep rear and support operations and brings it up to the echelon that the echelons that are concerned with campaigning and operations over time, right, on behalf of the Joint Force Commanders. So that principal tactical formation gets you to the idea that BCTs aren't the only thing that matters anymore. They're not the coin of the realm because all of the functional and multifunctional brigades and battalions that enable divisions to fight as formation, that's the level where that kind of comes to fruition. It also gets to the idea that large-scale combat operations are an echelons above brigade fight. And a look at what's happened in Ukraine on both sides when you tried to have, essentially a 2 or 3 star headquarters and then you're fighting multiple battalion-sized units, that lack of an echelon there really impeded the ability to achieve combined arms or to coordinate the employment of forces in time and space in any sort of coherent and synchronized manner. And so that's why we say that divisions are the principal tactical echelon during large-scale combat. Anybody else? Yes, sir. We've talked to the Army senior leadership several times, and while it was a joint function, we thought information was too important to make it the purview of one community, right? It's an enabling function for every other warfighting function. And it has an applicability in terms of enabling decision-making, protecting friendly information, informing audiences, influencing audiences, or attacking a threat, right? And so all Army capabilities have an information component and need to think about information, and that's why with the mission variables we talked about an information component to each of those variables. So we didn't see a need for that for the Army and Army forces the way we conduct operations. Information is everybody's business. Much like thinking about protection as an outcome is everybody's business and not just the purview of, say, a functional cell on a division or corps staff.